Hey there, fellow enthusiasts of the strange and unusual, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving headfirst into the chilling world of abandoned asylums. These haunting structures, once beacons of hope for the mentally ill, now stand as eerie monuments to a darker time in medical history. Join us as we peel back the layers of history, mystery, and maybe even a few ghost stories. You know me, I'm your skeptical but curious host, always up for a good scare, or at least a healthy dose of the unexplained. Buckle up, because we're about to unlock the chilling secrets behind these forgotten institutions. Let's get into it. Picture this. The year is 18-something and mental health treatment is in its infancy. Straitjackets, lobotomies, and a lot of misunderstanding. These asylums were meant to be a solution, a place to house and treat those deemed unfit for society. But with good intentions came unintended consequences. Overcrowding, understaffing, and grim conditions. Neglect, abuse, and suffering. No wonder these places have a reputation for being haunted. If you were stuck in one, you'd be pretty ticked off too. Ghosts are just really persistent vibes, right? Remember the real human stories within these walls. Places of both hope and despair. Maybe some of that residual energy is still hanging around. Now let's talk about the fun stuff. Ghosts. Every abandoned asylum worth its salt has a few good ghost stories attached to it. Tales of shadowy figures lurking in the hallways, disembodied whispers echoing through the empty wards, and objects moving on their own. Take Waverly Hills Sanatorium, for example. This place is like a ghost story buffet. You've got the legend of room 502, where a pregnant nurse allegedly hung herself. Then there's the story of the young boy who roams the halls bouncing a ball. And let's not forget the infamous death tunnel where they used to transport the bodies of deceased patients. Talk about a recipe for some restless spirits, right? Now I'm not saying I believe all of these stories, but I'm also not saying I don't. Because let's be real, there's something inherently creepy about abandoned asylums. The combination of their dark history, their decaying grandeur, and the sheer silence of these places is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. So whether you're a believer or a skeptic, you gotta admit, these ghost stories add an extra layer of intrigue to our exploration of these forgotten institutions. You know what really gets me about these abandoned asylums? It's the architecture, man. These places weren't designed to be cheerful, let's be real. They were built in an era when mental illness was seen as something to be contained, hidden away from the rest of the world. And the architecture reflects that. We're talking imposing facades, long dark hallways, and rooms that seem to go on forever. It's enough to make you feel claustrophobic just looking at it. And then there's the decay. Peeling paint, crumbling plaster, rusted medical equipment just lying around. It's like stepping into a time capsule, frozen in a moment of neglect and decay. But here's the thing. That decay is also what makes these places so fascinating. It's like nature is slowly reclaiming these spaces, erasing the evidence of the past, and in that process, it's creating something new and strangely beautiful. It's like these buildings are becoming living organisms, their walls whispering stories of the people who lived and died within them. Chapter 4. Urban Exploration Asylums in You. Okay, so you're watching this video and you're probably thinking, Shane, this is all very spooky and interesting, but I want to experience it for myself. And you know what? I don't blame you. There's a certain allure to exploring abandoned places, a sense of adventure and discovery that you just can't get from reading a book or watching a documentary. But before you grab your flashlight and head out to the nearest abandoned asylum, let's talk about urban exploration, or urbex as the cool kids call it. First and foremost, safety first. These places are abandoned for a reason. They're often structurally unsound, filled with hazards like broken glass, loose wires, and who knows what else. So, if you're going to explore, go with a buddy, tell someone where you're going, and wear appropriate clothing and footwear. And for the love of all that is holy, don't go messing with anything. You're there to observe, not to vandalize or steal. Remember, these places may be abandoned, but they're not forgotten. They're part of our history, and it's our responsibility to treat them with respect. Chapter 5. Separating Fact from Fiction. Okay, so we've talked about the spooky stories, the creepy architecture, and the thrill of exploration. But it's important to remember that these abandoned asylums weren't always haunted houses. They were real places where real people lived and suffered. The history of mental health treatment is riddled with mistakes, misconceptions, and mistreatment. These asylums, while initially intended as places of healing, often became overcrowded and underfunded, leading to inhumane conditions for patients. We've all heard the horror stories: electroshock therapy, lobotomies, patients being restrained and isolated for long periods. And while these practices may seem barbaric by today's standards, it's important to remember that they were often seen as the best available options at the time. So, as we marvel at the spooky aesthetics of these abandoned asylums, let's not forget the human cost of their history. Let's remember the patients who were mistreated, neglected, and forgotten within these walls. Chapter 6. Asylums in Pop Culture. Let's be real, part of the reason we're so fascinated by abandoned asylums is because of how they're portrayed in pop culture. I mean, Hollywood loves a good creepy asylum, right? From classic horror movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to more recent films like Grave Encounters, abandoned asylums have become synonymous with madness, mayhem, and of course ghosts. And it's not just movies. Video games like Outlast and The Evil Within put you right in the middle of a terrifying asylum, where every creaking door and flickering light could be your last. But here's the thing. These portrayals, while entertaining, often perpetuate harmful stereotypes about mental illness. They reinforce the idea that asylums were places of horror and madness, rather than places where people sought help and healing. So, while we enjoy our spooky movies and games, let's be mindful of the real-world impact of these portrayals. Let's remember that mental illness is not a source of entertainment. It's a serious health issue that deserves our understanding and compassion. Well, there you have it, another spooky adventure in the books. We've explored the history, the hauntings, and the cultural impact of abandoned asylums. And while we may never know for sure if these places are truly haunted, one thing's for certain: they're a fascinating and often unsettling glimpse into our past. So, the next time you see an abandoned asylum, remember the stories we've shared. Remember the people who lived and worked within those walls. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel a shiver down your spine as you wonder if their spirits still linger there. As always, thanks for watching and keep it spooky. Or don't. I'm not your dad.